Hi, I'm Andy Nyberg, and today I'd like to talk to you about how a fairly subtle shift in the way you think about your communication can really help you level up your skills as a product manager. But first, a little bit about me. I'm a product manager based in London, and I've been working in product for 7 or 8 years. I've worked at most levels of the product organization, from doing product insights to being a product owner, a product manager, director of product, and a head of product. I've worked primarily in the travel sector with brands like Travel Republic, Dnata Travel, and the Emirates Group. And currently I'm at Expedia. So, how much of product management really boils down to communication? There's a wide range of activities you'll be engaged in as a product manager, from producing artifacts like roadmaps to developing and playing back your strategy, both of which require really strong alignment with your team and your stakeholders. Or you could be involved in having a better understanding of your customers through UX research or looking at the quantitative data. You might be facilitating discovery workshops, or you could even just be talking through the delivery process with your team. But really, the point I'm going to make today is that all of these things are a form of communication. And really, acting as an effective product manager is about being a good translator. It's about picking up and interpreting the right inputs, processing and combining that information, and effectively conveying the right message to your audience. Product management is a job where it's all about coordination and communicating the right message in the right way. You're not usually writing code. You're not designing mock-ups and end-to-end experiences like a UX designer. Your role is essentially processing the right inputs and mapping them to the right outputs. And once you accept this model of translating inputs to outputs, it becomes clear that your credibility, your accuracy, your gravitas and authenticity really are your currency as a product manager. Without those things, it becomes very, very difficult to do your job. There's a great quote in Marty Kagan's Inspired, a fantastic book that I highly recommend if you haven't read it already, that product management is about insights and judgment, both of which require a sharp mind. And what are insights and judgments if not the product of information you have brought on board, processed and delivered to your team? It's also very interesting to me that almost all the literature and information out there around communication for product managers focuses, perhaps understandably, on the outputs. But I think to really be an effective product manager and really level up your ability to do that job, if you consider both sides of the communication and how you optimize pulling in the right inputs as well as communicating those outputs to your team, that's what will really take you to the next level. So I'm going to give you a few tips for optimizing how you pull in information. And first of all, it's really important you master active listening. This is probably the most obvious kind of input you get in the communication process. And it should go without saying, but you really need to make sure you're paying attention. You don't want to be playing with your phone or making notes. Whoever you're speaking to, give them your undivided attention and try and understand both what they're saying, but also what their motivations might be, why they're telling you what they are telling you. This could be a stakeholder, it could be one of your developers, it could be a customer through an interview, but it's really crucial that you try and get under the skin of the message that they're trying to pass across to you. Also give physical cues that you're engaged and listening, even as simple as nodding or making sure you're making eye contact or leaning forward. Just make sure the person communicating to you knows that you're interested and engaged. And I've also found it's very useful to confirm your understanding by asking what I call confirmation questions. So that's replaying what they have said to you in the form of another question. Just if you've understood it correctly, they will confirm and they will say yes. But if you've got things slightly wrong, it just makes sure that you're both on the same page as you're trying to receive that message. And finally, this is probably one of the most important points in this talk, is that creativity is often the result of recombination, of taking an idea from over here, putting it together with another seemingly unrelated idea from somewhere else, and coming up with a new creative solution. It could be a problem that one of your customers has mentioned to you, and you read about a solution that someone else has solved in another industry through the tech press. Or it could be something that you worked on years ago that rings a bell with a current problem. You can put those two things together to form a solution. Quite often, if you speak to creative people about some of the really innovative ideas they've come up with, they're a little embarrassed because almost everything is derivative to some extent. And quite often, it's just the ability to put these two disparate thoughts together that come up with the best ideas. And that's why it's really critical that as a product manager, you're like an antenna. You're just bringing in information all the time. You're always on, you're always listening, because that will empower you to really drive those innovative solutions. So that's listening when someone's speaking to you, but there are other really crucially important types of inputs. First and foremost, I would say the data. As a product manager, you need to be really close to the data. You need to be able to access the data, and you need to be able to understand the data. One of the problems with data, though, is quite often there's so much of it, you hit what is referred to as analysis paralysis. Now, my tip for overcoming that would be always have a clear idea of what questions you want to answer with the data. Always think, what would you like to know further down the line when you're speccing out your tracking? It could be, does this feature affect conversion? How is the color of this button affecting the behavior of my customers? If you start with those questions, it helps you both when you're establishing your tracking and collecting your data, as well as when you're doing the analysis. It really helps to have a firm hypothesis and make sure you're in the best possible position to answer those questions directly through the quant data. Next up, the technology. It's really important that you know enough about your tech stack. You don't have to be a developer. You don't necessarily have to write code in whatever language your tech stack uses, but you need to know enough to be able to have meaningful conversations with your team. So stay very close to your team, keep your ears open, hear what they like, what they dislike, any problems they're having on a technical level with the stack. That will always be incredibly useful to you. But also look into courses, look at talks. There's lots of free resources and communities out on the web that will really help you have a better understanding of your technology and have those really meaningful back and forth conversations with your tech team. Also, the market. It really is critically important that you have a solid understanding of your business, you know your competition, and you know the market. It should go without saying, but your team are going to be relying on you to be the person who knows the ins and outs of your business and the broader market. So make sure you get on the right newsletters, you're following the right Twitter feeds, you're on the right news sites, that you're really involved. And that actually goes beyond your particular market. I would highly recommend that you get on tech newsletters, you follow some of the tech Twitter feeds that are out there, just to get an understanding of what else is going on in other verticals, in other parts of the world. And that will really power that concept of recombination we were talking about a moment ago. Now, outputs. This is really about framing the message. How you communicate what you have picked up from your inputs. You've done your processing, you've done your recombination, you've done your filtering. So how do you get your message across in a way that is effective for your audience? My first tip is to think outcome first. As you're going into a meeting or a conversation or drafting a newsletter, understand what it is you want to achieve from this communication. Are you trying to drive alignment? Are you trying to persuade? Are you trying to get people involved and excited and engaged in your product? Have a clear understanding of what you want to achieve and go into that communication with that in mind. Next up, empathy. It's really important you put yourself in the shoes of whoever you're communicating to. What are their priorities? What are their concerns? What are their values? If you're speaking to your CEO or your senior stakeholders, understand what their goals are, What are they trying to achieve in that quarter, in that year? What are their KPIs? What are their key results that they're trying to go after? And if you start by explaining what you want to do in the context of their values and their point of view, you'll get much better traction through that conversation. Next up, it's really important to remember that emotions are contagious. If you go into a meeting or a conversation or an exchange and you're really positive and you're really confident and you're really enthused about what you're talking about, your audience will pick up on that. But similarly, if you go into a conversation with your team where you're deflated, your morale is low, that's going to rub off on the team and you're going to be much less effective as a team. And also, if you're speaking to your stakeholders and you're not confident, you're falling over your words, you don't seem to know exactly what it is you're talking about, or you're unclear, that is going to rub off on your stakeholders and it's going to affect your gravitas and it's going to affect your credibility, which, as we mentioned, is crucially important as a product manager. Next up, try and be clear and concise and eloquent. It always helps if you can deliver a headline, deliver the message in as clear and concise a way as possible. It will help your communication. It will help your audience understand exactly what it is you want to say. And by trimming away the extra fluff, it will help your message hit home. And finally, make sure you know your facts. Make sure you've done your research. You don't have to back up everything you say with data, but prepare to be challenged on everything you say. And likewise, be prepared to sort of value that challenge. That's how you're going to get to better outcomes. If you want people to challenge what it is you're saying, that's really going to help you get to the best end result. So, having talked about this concept of inputs and outputs and how you can optimize both sides of that communication, I've put together a few applied examples, a few product scenarios where you can put these ideas into practice. First up, in a product discovery workshop. So typically with a product discovery workshop, you're trying to get people to focus on the problem. A lot of people, particularly stakeholders, will already have ideas of how to solve that problem, but you really want to make sure people stay in the problem space and don't jump to solutionizing. So to that end, I would advise you go in with that goal very clearly in mind. Make sure you communicate to your team, to everyone who's in the workshop, that this is really about exploring the problem space. Next up, give them some context. Explain why. Why this problem? Why you're trying to solve this problem? How does this tie into your brand vision? How does this move you closer to where you want to go with your product? How does this align to the broader strategy? How is what you're trying to pursue, the problem you're trying to solve, how is that going to be valuable to both your users and your company? Next up, active listening is incredibly important. Product discovery workshops are an exercise in pulling that information in. It's very much about the input side of communication. You're likely going to have lots of ideas around how you may want to tackle some of the problems that you're discussing, but it's really important you take a back seat and create an environment where people feel happy to share and feel like their points of view and ideas are valuable. And that leads on to my final point around product discovery, empathy. In all these workshops, people are going to raise ideas, which are valuable ideas and still valid call outs, but they may not align to the goal of the workshop. I found it's always a good idea to have what I refer to as a parking lot. It's somewhere you can capture these ideas, which don't necessarily align to the goal of the workshop directly, but it shows that they are valued ideas, that whoever has raised these points are being listened to, and it is something that you can circle back and deal with after this workshop. I've always found that to be a very useful technique. So further through the product lifecycle, you will likely find yourself trying to align your team and your stakeholders around priorities. Now, alignment is one of the hardest things to achieve within your team and your business. And alignment doesn't necessarily mean that everyone agrees. There's bound to be different points of view and different priorities across different parts of your business. It may be that marketing have their own set of priorities, whilst the commercial team have their set of priorities. Alignment is really about explaining why what you're trying to pursue is going to be valuable to the business, why it's going to be valuable to your customers, and at least getting everyone to agree to move in that direction. Whether that means that they have deprioritized what they want to achieve, or they have agreed to prioritize another part of the business's priorities, it all comes down to explaining the why behind what it is you're trying to pursue. Also, make sure you're pulling in the right inputs. This is where it's crucially important that you've done your homework, that you've done your research. So this is where having quantitative data, having qualitative data from customer interviews to know the market forces, your customer trends. If you can quote all of this as reasons why these are the priorities, this is the first piece of work you're going to tackle on the roadmap, that is what will really ultimately drive that alignment within your team. And finally, actions. You need to make sure you leave any of these meetings with very clear actions. Once you have that alignment, you need to agree a measurement plan. This is what we're going to pursue because we believe it will drive this value for our customers, it will drive this change in behavior, and we're going to measure that change of behavior with these data points. Make a commitment to get in touch regularly, even if it's just sending around an update email, and make sure you follow through on that commitment. That means if someone has agreed to your priorities, even though it wasn't necessarily something they were pursuing, this will give them some comfort that at least they're going to be kept in the loop and there is going to be some level of follow-up after the fact. Finally, another good example would be in a refinement session. So this is when you're taking your ideas, you've taken your epics in Jira, you've boiled it down to exactly what you want to achieve, and you're making sure your tech team have a good understanding of what it is you want them to pursue. Again, very crucial, very important upfront that you make it clear what the goal is. This goal is about having a happy development team who fully understand what it is you want to build and have a really good understanding around how they can pick that up and go and start developing it. Also, make sure everyone is clear on the why. Start with the why. Start with why this piece of work is important, why it moves you towards your end goal and your mission as a company, and how it aligns with your strategy. That is the best way to get some motivation amongst your team and have them really following the mission rather than just plowing through Jira tickets. Also, active listening in refinement sessions is absolutely crucial. If your development team start raising concerns, you have to listen to them. They are going to be very, very important hurdles for you to tackle. You have to make sure that their concerns are important, that they are valid, and you don't view them as impediments, but challenges that you're going to have to tackle in order to move forward. Finally, double check when you leave the meeting that everyone has had their chance to be heard, that everybody is fully clear on what it is you're trying to achieve, and that they can go away and start working in that sprint with a very clear view of what it is you want to achieve and what it's going to look like at the end of the sprint. They understand the sprint goals and they can pick up those tickets and start developing the next day. Very, very important. So that's my view on how you can alter your thoughts around communication to be a back and forth. The idea of product manager as a translator is absolutely critical. You have all of your subject matter experts, you have the customer, you have the business. They're all feeding inputs into you, and it's how you process those inputs and pass them on to your team or your customers or your stakeholders that is really the core of what you're there to do. And remember that those inputs are just as important as the outputs. Making sure you're pulling through the right data points, that you understand the market forces, you're listening to your team and the experts, is critical for you to be able to map those inputs to the right outgoing message. And finally, the message. Make sure you know your audience, make sure you're clear, make sure you're concise, and make sure you understand their concerns, priorities, and values, and that you explain why what it is you're trying to convey is important according to those priorities, concerns, and values. And that's it. I hope you found that useful. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn as Andy Nyberg. And I hope you've enjoyed the session. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.